have a reference point to do the blend together for people that are following along weekly. It's certainly been an interesting experience reading this again after about a decade, and the first pass through was like, wow, I mean, I know I've mentioned this a few times, but a really interesting biography about Helen Schuckman and how she described A Course in Miracles, and that's of course what the subtitle of the book is. But once you start reading it again with another decade or so of, of practice of the ideas of the course, it's like, wow, this is really a great revelatory experience of looking at all of our resistance and the ways that we can watch that without condemnation and just see that there's another way of looking at things without condemnation and without resistance. So, I mean, because Helen's resistance was quite profound, as is noted in this book very clearly. And even though she was an incredibly clear channel to the not just the information, but the inspiration, it was clear that it was coming through with negligible interference when she was in her right mind. And I was listening to one of Ken Wapnick's other audios this morning, and he was saying how, when Helen was in her right mind, it just came through very clearly, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's so hard to understand, how you could have that kind of cognitive dissonance where you are, but we do it all the time. I do it all the time,
Yes.
so I don't
Yes.
know why it's hard to understand. I believe a certain thing, I know a certain thing, but man, when it comes right down to how I act, or how my life works, I tend to uh, zone out from my reality and go into this state of fear. I am at home. Fear is a stranger here. Today's lesson pretty well describes my psychological situation where, I honestly think that there's something to be afraid of here, something in this world that can harm me because I have completely mistaken of who I am. And that's, kind of uh, hard to understand. Um, and yet, it, when you think about your life and think about for me, think about the roles that I have played in my life. I played the role of a child, and a student in school, and a uh, a wife and a mother, a girlfriend, or whatever, an engineer. I played all these roles, and I was really not any of those things. When I look at it now, I was not. Those were not what I was. Those were just the roles that I was playing in whatever situation I happened to be in. But the truth and reality of what I am, um, is still the same. And, if I'm out there thinking I'm the character, then I will be in fear because that world is uncertain. But if I'm remembering the truth of who I am, and just even remembering who I am at all, um, then I see. I thought that, when my first, um, when my stepdad died, it was just going to be the end of the world. When I thought when my first boyfriend left me, dumped me, I would never find love again. I mean, 13, 14 years old, he, we think we are these characters, and then when we look back and see I was never that, and that never happened, then it's a good illustration, but I'm still doing it. So what can we say about that? So, with Helen, I mean, she was playing a lot of roles too, and um, I don't think she ever believed she was any of them. You know what I'm saying?
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, and I think the surreality of looking back on those past epochs of our lives, and lives being plural. Not, but because we've had lives, I oftentimes think too is like you were saying, and all the different roles I've had in the coming up on 70 years of the dream figure Bruce, and it's like, well, what does all that mean? Well, of course it says out in isolation it means nothing, and even put together in time, just as a single person in isolation, it still means nothing. But in the context of how this dream figure um, can how really the decision maker can shift the identity from the dream figure to the dreamer, using those experiences as the classroom, then it starts to have at least some meaning. Not that the specifics are meaningful in themselves, but they're pointing to something greater. And I think that's why we're all drawn to the course, because even though the specific words don't mean anything, but when you put them together, it's that melos, that holistic synergy, the gestalt, if you will, of the meaning that starts to evolve and take shape. And I think that's how we really can see our lives in the context of everyone else's life too. Is like on my, I think I'm trying to remember a quote from, I think it was Hillel, a Jewish philosopher, who said, if I am something like, if I am for myself alone, what am I? And if I'm not for others, what good is it, or something like that. And if not now, when? It was like the three questions, and I probably totally botched it, but it was something along those lines. But the idea is that out of context, as an individual or individuality, I think the duality is a big clue. Um, that a separate self couldn't possibly mean anything without the context of what does the whole mean. And I think that's why the course says, the notes of the song are nothing. What we want is the whole song, not just a wisp of melody, like the Forgotten Song suggests.
Exactly. Yeah. So um, it's still for me a mystery. And I think once you unravel the mystery, then you won't be here anymore to be worrying about it.
Well, yeah, I mean, we don't have to worry about going poof, but our
Well,
seems like
you won't go poof because you'll know. y- It's like, the end of Columbo. Once they figure out who did it, then there's no more searching. So,
right, right.
it's it. You just stop searching. And that, you know, it wouldn't be a poof. It would be like a whiff. Like, oh, nothing. Anyway, we had just read this and we were just going to start what is now Miracle Principle 40. So do you want me to read?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. So what is now Miracle Principle 40 was followed by oh, we already read this.
We
Yes,
did, we did, yeah.
we did. Oh, okay. Here's my mark over here. Why am I here? Okay. So I'm going to stop that because we talked about all that last week.
Okay.
Okay. So we're going on. It is interesting. How about that?
Yep, yep.
It is interesting at this point to contrast Helen and Bill's quite different primary defenses, projection for Helen and denial for Bill. In terms of Jesus, fearing his love for them and theirs for him, Helen basically fought with Jesus, projecting onto him her own failures, seeking to make him responsible for her feelings of unhappiness. Bill, on the other hand, continually attempted to deny the person of Jesus, finding it difficult even to say his name, preferring JC in place of the name Jesus. In his later years, Bill would publicly as well as privately state his belief that the source of the Course was the Christ mind or Christ consciousness, thereby continuing to avoid the personal presence and love of the one whose course he so faithfully dedicated his to he so faithfully dedicated his life. Okay. This denial was particularly important defense for him. And I'm going to take a look at this. 8. Uh, this is the footnote. On one level, as I shall discuss in part 3, one can say that Bill was correct in describing A Course in Miracles as coming from the abstract Christ mind. However, the specific motivation behind his speaking this way appeared to be Bill's denial of his own personal relationship with Jesus as Bill. It was thus the voice of fear speaking, not wisdom. Jesus' frequent attempts during this period to help Bill develop his relationship with him were aimed at reducing this fear. Okay, and that was the end of that. So Bill was afraid of Jesus as a person, or that having a personal relationship with Jesus. And I wonder, maybe because of his homosexuality, that he didn't want to have a transference of um what was love to him um to something that seemed still to him not not whole, because he didn't accept his homosexuality as um he kind of saw it as a sickness, or saw it as a something that didn't it didn't square with the rest of the world. He had to hide it and had to be afraid of it.
Mhm.
So,
It occurs to me that as you're saying that, that could have been one factor that entered into it. It's just a conjecture,
yeah.
I suppose, on our part. But what I think the general principle here that Ken, I think, is making with this footnote, and it occurs to me that I can certainly relate to, the idea of identifying with a non-ego presence, um, in our mind. That's the thing that every ego is you know them's fighting words, basically. That's when we go from suspiciousness to viciousness, because no ego wants to let go of the insanity, and the mechanism of projection. So as long as, it could be Buddha for someone else, it could be uh, Mary Magdalene for someone else who follows that, or it could be, it could be anything that, since we read those about those three figures in the Gary Berard's most recent book. It's like, well, pick any non-ego presence, as Ken Wapnick would say, as a symbol of the Holy Spirit, and then that then becomes an opportunity to look at how much we resist identification with something that is not just abstract, but which is what the course suggests that our real identity is all encompassing and unencumbered by specifics, but identifying with something that literally undoes the ego's thought system, by persistent looking at the insanity of it. I think that's kind of more to the point of what Ken is talking about here. At least that's my guess reading that. That's
Mhm. Yeah,
but
of course, that makes a lot of sense too. I think there's a lot of stuff that, got rolled up into that.
yeah,
Because yeah, for Bill, it was kind of an identity thing. Well, it was for Helen too. So,
yeah,
uh,
yeah. And I think even just the symbolic gesture of, um, being willing to talk within a comfortable setting or a forum like we're talking on now, that was a barrier to me about 15 years or so ago, when I was approached with, by Dove Fishman about, hey, why don't you get on ACIM Gather and do a show? And I thought, me, I was still identifying with a separate self, and I'm, obviously still working through that, as all of course students are. But, I think I've learned to realize that even when I was teaching adult school classes, there were moments years ago, back in the, oh, what would that have been, the mid 80s, when there would be a part of me that would step aside and let, that presence kind of come forth and through. And I realized that, there's something greater than the little s self. And I think that's what we're all working on, is to notice the insignificance and ultimate irrelevance of the tiny separate self that we've made up, and the ultimate importance and happy inevitability of re-identifying with the shared essence, the shared identity with a capital I. And that's, well, what we're all working on, but we all have enormous resistance to that. So I can totally relate to that. I think we all have, different forms of denial and resistance. But in this case, the denial um, of that relationship, I still tend to use Holy Spirit more than Jesus, for a similar reason, just because I think I'm more comfortable with the abstract, probably because I'm still somewhat defended against um, having a more continuous relationship with a direct um, identity. I mean, the course does talk about that revelation is intensely personal, which almost seems contradictory, and yet if that person is truly transpersonal, it seems like a contradiction. But if what's all inclusive as a self, capital S self, still is a self, but it's a non-dual self, there's still an awareness that is an identity. I'm not sure if I'm coming across with any kind of clarity or not, but
It's hard to come across with any clarity on that subject because it's well, I was going to say because it's so abstract, but it's
yeah,
simply because the ego just doesn't want to hear it.
right. Yeah, and the usual forms of kind of, I was even thinking when I was listening to Ken's comments this morning out walking, something in Gary Renard's book about pure non-duality, like semi non-duality, and I think there's one other flavor that there's not quite full, not non-duality, and I was thinking, well, we're probably all bouncing around between those when we're studying and practicing the course, because there's a part of us that doesn't want to let go of the idea that there's really something that has no specific identity. And there's, without naming any names, a dear friend of mine who I met just this past year um, facilitates a Course of Love study group, as in addition to attending a Course in Miracles study group that I attend weekly. And he was talking about how some years ago, not too long ago, he had a extended mystical experience where he experienced what he calls unity consciousness for like a week or two or three or something like that. Anyway, and he described it as not having um, an ego awareness, but yet there was a sense of self. And I'm still wrangling with that one myself. And I don't doubt the legitimacy of what he experienced, but I'm still wondering, it's like, well, is that really what the course is? But then he kind of came back to his everyday experience, and now he's wanting to return to that mystical state.
Hmm.
But I'm thinking, how do we know what the truth is until we experience it directly? And then what comes to mind is, the little glimpses that we have um, are at best reflections and shadows of a greater light. Um, there's something in the Bible years ago that struck me as very profound, and it's in, I think it's the Gospel of John, something like the light shineth in the darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not.
Hmm.
And I was thinking, well, from we, and it kind of ties into what Ken says about how when we went through the four splits, we believed anyway that we burned the bridge after each split back to where we came from, and that's why we feel uncertain, lonely, and in constant fear, because we think we orphaned ourselves totally from anything that can help, thinking that somehow that was going to be an interesting experiment or whatever. But we painted ourselves into a mental corner, so to speak, not realizing that it's the room that we think we're in isn't real, and there's no corners, and there's no person
Exactly.
within the corner.
Exactly, exactly. And I think, Jesus, what your friend experienced, I believe, is what Jesus refers to in the course as glimpses
Hmm.
of of like the real world or glimpses of heaven where you get this little because I've had that happen too. And it's almost like being in a disassociated um state um where you recognize that everything around you is not real. It is a dream. And uh that that there is a peace that comes from knowing that
Mhm.
uh,
Mhm.
that is, a very real and deep peace, but
Oh yeah.
definitely something that I couldn't hold on to. And how could I when I have uh, uh, so many excuses in my mind for why that can't be, or that can't be permanent, or that can't happen to me, or that couldn't, and I'm sure that, it was partly what happened with your friend. You come back to quote unquote reality because the it's like a rubber band. You stretch it out so far, and when you let go, it just sends you right back, unless you break the rubber band. And then you just I think that's happened to people. But I don't think that it can be permanent as long as we're living in this world or thinking that we're in this body, because we still have um, uh, guilt and fear and grievances.
Mhm.
I mean, you can have glimpses of wholeness, but as long as you're still thinking in terms of guilt and fear and grievances, then uh, you can't stay very long in a state of non-judgment.
True that.
And that's what it seems like to me is I mean, that's what I think is heaven, is when you come to the place where you have no judging. No,
Mhm.
you have no more opinion about anything.
Mhm. Mhm.
And just everything is exactly as it is. And I don't have to criticize it or be afraid of it. I just allow it, not even allow it. I mean, I don't have to allow reality. All I have to do is just, be love here in this. And everything that seems to be happening it is like a dream. It's like I don't know how to describe it, but like a dream is good enough. Anyway, uh we will go on. So, and good luck to your friend in A Course of Love. I have a lot of friends that study A Course of Love, and I had some problems about that. I didn't really like it. I thought, and I do know her, Mari Perone, and have had lovely conversations with her, and I've read the first book, and I think it's great for folks that still want to believe the world is here. That's probably the difference. Is you know I think it does kind of point to the world being real and actually capable of having consequences, or things being done in it. But anyway, enough of that. So Jesus continued, and the reader familiar with the Course in Miracles will notice again how much of the personal material meant for Helen and Bill found its way into the Course itself. You might add, this is continuing, you might add that Bill's false idea about his own exclusion from universal love is fallacious in your terms and arrogant in his. His real specialness does not stem from exclusion, but from inclusion. All my brothers are special. And that's from text, chapter 1, section 5.
Mhm. Makes all the
He,
difference.
yeah, yeah. All my brothers are special. He should stop interpreting this as all except Bill. This is ridiculous. I love Jesus says ridiculous.
Mhm. Mhm.
Tell him that the implied lack of love that his version contains is way off the mark. Another pun, and misses the level of right thinking entirely. He must heal his perception in this respect. He must work a miracle on behalf of himself here. Tell Bill that 50 million Frenchmen can be wrong because the notion is too fragmented. What can't be wrong is the universal sonship of which he is part. And I think that 50 million Frenchmen, is that a ad about mustard or something? I I don't I
I don't know.
it's a
The only thing I can,
television commercial.
okay, I'm gonna have to Google that, I think.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's a television commercial. Let's see. Can I do that here?
Try
No.
it.
But I can can I copy it? Yeah. Anyway, you can Google it.
Okay, I'm Googling it.
Okay, good. Uh, because okay, what can't be wrong is the universal sonship of which he is part. Okay, additional notes followed, including those on the Golden Rule from text chapter 1, section 3, now found in chapter 1. Jesus then turned to a prominent, if not sometimes humorous defense of Helen's, her penchant for forgetting names or seeking to change them. The most significant of these changes was in using the name Jonathan for her husband Louis, as we have already seen. She also, at the moment of giving her name on the baptismal certificate at the age of 13, inadvertently, when in quotes, gave her mother's maiden name instead of her own last name. Jesus explained this defensive phenomena to her in this way. I emphasize again that your tendency to forget names is not hostility, but a fear of involvement or recognition. You had misinterpreted human encounters as opportunities for magic rather than for miracles. And so you tried to protect the name. This is a very ancient and primitive way of trying to protect a person.
Mhm. Well, just think of all the countless ways that, defending the family name, or defending the tribe, or defending the team, or defending the neighborhood, or the community, or any provincial boundary that we want to define. It could be intergalactic, I mean, as well as very small boundary. Um, anything from quarks to quasars again, right? So it's like, well, as long as there's a we and a they, or an inner and an outer, and us and a them, we're protecting a name. We're protecting a silly, seemingly separate self.
And yes, and uh, the 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 name is used in magic. And so a lot of times people will say, um, in like movies and stories where there's like fairy tales, Rumpelstiltskin is my name. If you can guess what my name is, then you can have power over me. If you know my name, you have power over me. I know Bill read a lot when he was a
Mm,
kid, and he probably
mhm.
read a lot of those kind of stories where the name was a magical formula that would take away a power or give a power. So, um, did you find the 50 million Frenchmen?
Yeah, I did. I put it the link in the chat.
Oh, okay,
uh,
cool.
and it's probably somewhat peripheral to our conversation, but since you had mentioned, it says, it was a book, a musical comedy with a book by Herbert Fields, lyrics by Cole Porter, opened on Broadway in 1929, adapted for film 2 years later. And it says the title is a reference to the 1927 hit song 50 Million Frenchmen Can't Be Wrong by Willie Raskin, Billy Rose, and Fred Fisher, which compared free attitudes in the 1920s Paris with censorship and prohibition in the United States. And so that may be tying into, the era in which Bill Thetford was in, which was certainly mostly in the pre uh, freer thinking attitudes about gay and lesbian behavior. So that
Yes.
that may have been part of the reference there. That might have been just a
Interesting.
a, a,
Yeah.
pri- a private comment, meant for Bill. But as we're trying to do here is take the things that are specific and and do like Jesus suggested in the previous comment. It's like, if all our siblings are special, meaning everyone, then it takes the whole wind out of, it takes the wind completely out of the sails of the word special, right?
Exactly. Exactly. And if you're included in that whole, then then you can't be outside of it being
Yeah.
special. So
And if
yeah,
the only name we need to protect is a name that doesn't need protection, then that's basically the security and where the security and peace come from in our mind, because there's nothing to defend in pure non-duality, because there's no other to defend
exactly.
or to defend
Absolutely.
against.
Absolutely. So, yeah, interesting. I even think about the defense that we do of A Course in Miracles. When you just said about non-duality, and I thought about, there's these teachers of Course in Miracles that are saying it's not non-duality. And, they're making a lot of, YouTube videos and stuff saying, why the Course in Miracles is not real, true non-duality. And, I'm like, that word, non-duality, it has a meaning to me, and you are profaning or whatever the course by 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 saying these things. There I am trying to protect and defend something that absolutely needs no protection whatsoever, is the
Yeah,
teachings
good
of
point.
course. So
Yeah, kind of
uh
ties into the aha moment I had in I think it was actually in high school, but certainly in later years as well, when I was realizing at different times that I was starting to demonize demonizers. It's like,
mm,
well, if someone is condemning someone else, if I'm condemning them for doing the condemnation, then guess what category I'm in myself? I'm just as dualistic as the dualism I'm trying to escape from. Yeah.
exactly. It's like
Yeah.
that old song, I knew that you knew that you knew that I knew. It's all about it. We all know, but we're pretending we don't. So, all right. So let me continue on reading here.
Sure.
Okay. Note the very old Jewish practice of changing the name of a person who is very ill, so that when the list is given to the angel of death, the person with that name will not be found. So this is good. See, this is a good example of the curiously literal regression which can occur in very bright people when they become afraid. You and Bill both do it. Actually, it is a device closely related to the phobia in the sense that they both narrow fear to a simple aspect of a much larger problem in order to enable them to avoid it. A similar mechanism works when you get furious about a comparatively minor infraction by someone to whom you are ambivalent. A good example of this is your response to Jonathan, i.e., Louis, who does leave things around in very strange ways. Actually, he does this because he thinks that by minor areas of disorganization, he can protect his stability. I remind you that you have done this yourself for years and should understand it very well. This should be met with great charity rather than with great fury. The fury comes from your awareness that you do not love Jonathan as you should, and you narrow your lack of love by centering your hate on trivial behavior in an attempt to protect him from it. For example, the hatred. You also call him Jonathan for the same reason. Note that a name as human symbol is a human symbol that stands for a person. Superstitions about names are very common for just that reason. That is why people sometimes respond with anger when their names are spelled or pronounced incorrectly. Actually, the Jewish superstition about changing names was a distortion of a revelation about how to alter or avert death. But the revelation's proper content was that those, quote, who change their mind, unquote, not name, about destruction or hate do not need to die. Death is a human affirmation of a belief in hate. That is why the Bible says there is no death, and that is why I demonstrated that death does not exist. Remember that I came to fulfill the law by reinterpreting it. The law itself, if properly understood, offers only protection to man. Those who have not yet, quote, changed their minds, unquote, have entered the, quote, hellfire, unquote, concept into it. All right. I just want to stop
Well,
there.
a
Uh,
lot in that what you
yeah,
just
there,
read. Yeah.
yeah. So do you have
Yeah.
anything?
Oh, just yeah, plenty.
Yeah,
I'm thinking that um, that changing the name, it's there's certainly on the superficial level, the way we use superficial characteristics in order to avoid looking at the fundamental sameness. And one of Ken's audios I was listening to the other morning, it kind of struck me, and it kind of stuck with me. He made the comment that the most effective way to help us in our practice of forgiveness is, rather than trying to force ourselves to see the sameness, the first step oftentimes really is, and the prerequisite for seeing sameness is to forgive ourselves for wanting to see the differences. And I thought, well, that's a really good insight. And so, the difference in names, the difference in identity, the difference in appearance, the difference in, so many characteristics and parameters that we could classify not just humans, but other species and other objects in our material universe. I mean, we got this whole Linnaean system of biology that makes all these, kingdom, phylum down to genus and species things. But we within our circle of acquaintances, we have countless little microscopic variations, and our senses are fine tuned to see differences. So there's that just kind of jumps to mind. But in changing, death is a human affirmation of a belief in hate. Well, and it is always death is always about the mind from the Course's perspective, because anything that the Course talks about is about the mind. So death is really no equivalent than oblivion, which is basically being mindless. And that's, again, slamming the doors and burning the bridges behind us. So we think we did when we left pure non-duality, left perfect oneness, left heaven, and think, we still think that we have abandoned our creator and therefore each other. And then that kind of ties into his comments about, our Helen's hate for Louis and calling him Jonathan. And another thing that one of Ken's audios that he talked about, I've been listening a lot in morning walks. He was saying how, governments, when they want to declare war on something, they have to refer to the opposing country or regime as in some kind of derogatory name, and that way they're subhuman, and therefore it's okay to annihilate, and to destroy that culture. But we'll have a mixed bag. We're all simultaneously attracted not only to love but also to guilt, because we're so ambivalent, just like Helen's story is. And as we keep reading it, just evolves that ambivalence and that enormous resistance we have, even though that there's incredible clarity and incredible insanity. But those are the two thought systems we all have, right? I mean, that's just top of my head from what you
yeah,
just
yeah,
read.
yeah.
Yeah,
It really,
there's more there, of course. Yeah,
yeah. It really. I mean, we could go for a week talking about how this works, but
yeah,
uh, uh, the idea that, uh, as you were saying, we diminish people, or groups of people. I mean, we do it all the time. The homeless. What do you think when I say the homeless, or Nazis, or uh, you know, Jews, or any kind of time that I look at, you know, people single them out and give them a title, give them a name, and make up a story about them. They no longer are uh, the holy sons of God. They are
yeah,
those
yeah.
things that we made them into, and therefore it's okay for us to attack them. And yeah, I did, because I grew up in, as you did, during the era when our friends were going off to Vietnam
Hmm.
and family, and one of the main things that they did in Vietnam was they gave the Vietnamese people names, nicknames, and call them this, that, and the other thing, so
Yep.
that you wouldn't feel bad to kill them because they were not the same thing as you were. And I mean, that's just it's so dehuman. It is dehumanizing right there and then.
Yep.
Uh, but we do that all the time. Whenever we look at a person and assign them to a group and say, oh, the gays, or the trans people, or the African Americans, or the like I said, the Nazis, whenever we do that, they're no longer individual humans, holy sons of God. They are something that we can attack. So, you know, I, we have to really be honestly very careful of that, because Course in Miracles students
And non-Course in Miracles students.
are the ones that study the blue book versus the ones that study the purple book versus the ones that study the sparkling book versus the ones that study the pearly book. They're we in our own community um, do this to each other, and so it starts at home. It starts here. Um, so uh,
Or the tangerine book with the pistachio highlights,
ooh, I want
what
that
what
one.
what difference does it make if the content's the same, right? When you were saying, dehumanizing, I was thinking, well, human is actually a mixed bag, because to identify as human, we're essentially identifying with the thing that Ken is pointing out in this biography of Helen that applies to all of us, is that ambivalence and that split mind, that as we become aware of it, we realize that well, that's kind of the core of humanity, is this ideal, that we in our culture thinking that human is as high as we can go, but maybe humanity is really, or dehumanizing is really, uh, maybe a better word would be desaming. We're basically removing the sameness that's available in our awareness, which is really the source of true compassion and caring. And like in Helen's case with her calling Louis Jonathan, as long as there's some specific behaviors that she objected to. And I can certainly think of a few dozen things that my wife does around the house that bug me, and vice versa, and to this day. It is like,
Oh,
and if you just think about that, well, but I'm beginning to notice how silly those are, and then see how invested I am, and just looking at that. I mean, I think that's really helpful, to just see that I don't have to make a big deal of it. And the number of those things has diminished greatly, but just noticing how the mind wants to go there and wants to make big deals out of the most trivial things. But everything in this world is involving space and time and specifics is ultimately trivial, right? And
yeah.
and there's the basis of the ego justifying hate as well. You are attempting to scale my castle walls, of my fortress of individuality. And if I let the sameness in, then my kingdom is bereft.
Well,
But
you can't
that's
have any
ego. It's every
walls.
ego's mantra, right? Yeah, right.
Yeah, you can't have any walls if everything is the same because it all flattens out. It's
Exactly. Yeah. Not too well. I mean, even on the maps of the world, you see political boundaries for fishing limits, on the ocean, but those are kind of arbitrary. And well, we have to put the things in the ground, for surveyors to say, well, this is property corners, and all these now fancy laser assisted surveying equipment to get down to micrometers of you know, angles and lengths of properties, and yet those are all on the tectonic plates that are moving around. Who knows in a few million years where the property values will be, right?
and
At little
actually,
lines, yeah.
That company I was working for that did the solar installations,
Yeah.
we used like a GPS.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
I mean, you can, to the millimeter, centimeter, whatever,
Yeah. Yeah.
find the boundaries of things
Right.
by
Right.
uh, you don't even have to put a laser on or a thing on the ground or whatever. But yeah, that's pretty cool.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And GPS, I know we've talked about it before, but I, probably not in this conversation for a while. But I think GPS is such a cool metaphor because in a couple of sort of nerdy ways. One is that the signals that the GPS receiver in your phone or in your car receives are much, much quieter than the ambient noise level of that part of the spectrum, and the electromagnetic spectrum. I can say that. And the way that it works is because the noise is random and doesn't repeat, the GPS receivers look for a signal that repeats over and over and over again and locks onto that signal and literally pulls the signal out of the noise by using statistical processing. And once it locks onto that signal, it knows what to look for, and it's able to look at that repeating pattern and pull the signal out of the noise, which is kind of what we're doing with our mind by because the noise of what changes all the time is the ego's consistent blathering about all the specifics of the dream of space and time that we're in. Where Holy Spirit's consistency is nothing happened, nothing happened, nothing happened. Log on to that. That's
Yeah,
the basis of forgiveness. Now I can forgive. Now I can forgive. Now I can forgive. And then the reflection in this world is when we're driving in our cars or whatever, or plane or surveying. Now we know exactly where we're at, and if we're using it for directions, we have that guidance that says, well, you might have missed that last turn that I was recommending, but I'm not going to condemn you for it. Just take the next exit and then use the overpass to get back and go the other.
recalculating.
Recalculating, exactly. Yeah. But
I
that's a
love
great
it.
that's a great metaphor, isn't it?
I love it. Yes, yeah,
Yeah.
it is so awesome. So let's see. Oh, do you have to leave early today?
I don't today,
Okay,
but
okay.
yeah.
All right. So we just have a little bit more to read. I
Yep. Yep.
realize I haven't let you read it all, but
Well, that's
um,
okay. That's okay. It all evens out.
okay. Okay. So
I've been blathering a lot too.
I call it intelligent conversation. I've heard
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
yeah,
Sure. Why
because
not?
I'm engaging in it. Is
It's
interesting.
it's totally fun. Yeah.
Okay.
Enjoyable.
So a little later, Jesus re-emphasizes the point about asking his advice and help. The reason you have been late recently for work because you were taking dictation is merely because you didn't remember to ask me when to stop. This is an example of the indiscriminate or uncontrolled miracle working we already spoke of. It is well meant but ill advised. Note also that you closed the book and put it aside without consulting me. Ask, is this all? Scribes must learn Christ's control to replace their former habits, which did produce scarcity in place of abundance. From errors of this kind, the sense of deprivation is inevitable, but very easily corrected. So there again, I mean, Jesus is getting real personal to her. And she could, I would be asking, well, wait a minute, why don't you just tell me? Don't you have a watch? You know, I'm gonna be late for work. Do I have to ask you? Is this enough? But I think it's all kind of tongue in cheek because uh, that also might mean that she was kind of using it as an excuse to be late. Uh, so I couldn't, what I had to be late. Jesus kept talking to me. What can I do? Uh, which is a great excuse. If I could use that at work, well, Jesus was talking to me and he wouldn't shut up. So that's why I'm late. That would be pretty funny. But anyway, this is really an important point to ask. Is there more? Is this all? Um, and if you're thinking you haven't heard enough, then uh, maybe you haven't. Maybe you need to hear more. So anyway, that's a thought. Oh, I was talking to Joni this morning. I forgot to ask her about that recorder. Um, anyway, do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, the one that pops out as the abundance or lack thereof is really the abundance of peace, right? And when we are feel disconnected from source, which reflected in this world and using the course's jargon would be when we turn our back on Holy Spirit's advice to forgive. We feel bereft, we feel abandoned, and even though we're the one doing the abandonment, that's always the irony of it. Is the secret of salvation is this: we're doing this to ourselves. We're the only way that we can feel a lack or any kind of dis-ease, or lack of peace is by turning our back on our true identity and our inheritance, which is eternally present in our mind if we're wanting to look for it, right?
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes, exactly. So, he's talking about scribes here, but that is the same advice for me. Uh,
Oh, of course, yeah. And we're all really transcribing the ideas in our mind from the Holy Spirit, if you want to look at it that way. And the more we apply them by using every specific in our life as our classroom, whether we take literal notes on paper or computer or whatever, is kind of irrelevant. But if we're paying attention, if we're looking at the insanity of the ego and not condemning ourselves, we're being a faithful scribe. I think that's something I really appreciate in so much of Ken Wapnick's work is that, if we can just look at the insanity of the ego and not judge ourselves, not condemn ourselves, that's it. That's the whole course.
yeah, and it is a habit.
Yeah.
Uh,
Oh, yeah. Very much.
that is
Yeah.
a habit.
And it takes a while. Yeah.
Yeah, and I find myself more and more every day just being in a calm and joyful place because I am asking all the time. What am I supposed to do here? What will I say and to whom? Where am I going? You
Right.
know, I'm only here to be truly helpful. And man, that is something that has stood me by so well and has actually made me, in fact, last night my partners kind of got in an argument with each other, and Sandy said to me, "How can you be so calm?" I'm like, I don't know. I don't have any investment in this. I guess. I mean, I wish she wouldn't be in an argument because I'd like to, enjoy my evening and play some games. But if that's what you guys want to do, then we'll have to. I don't even care about it. It's not like it's upsetting to me at all, which is really. I used to be frantic. I would get frantic when people would be having arguments like that. So that's a tremendous gift to me for sure. So anyway,
Well, these conversations are a tremendous gift to me every Saturday, and I want to thank you and Lynn, and all the other people that are on the Zoom call and listening via various streamings, and whoever else might be listening to these after the facts for participating,
right
in this with
on
us.
YouTube, and people do watch
Yeah,
us on YouTube. So
yeah.
I love it. Thank you, Bruce. I love you, brother, and
Likewise to all, and have a great week.
we'll see you next week. Bye bye.